On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest for this episode is Kyle Sweetser. Kyle Sweetser is a new face in Alabama politics and a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. In this conversation, Kyle opens up about the life experiences that led him to run for office, the values he hopes to bring to the Senate, and what he's hearing from everyday Alabama residents as he travels the state.
We're at this point where we have so many folks that have been led into this delusional belief that we can exist without labor. It's scary because we're, going to see short. We already have, I think in Alabama, you'd have to check me on, it's either 35 or 42 in that range. But let's say 42 just to be safe. Jobs, people per 100 jobs available. We are in a crisis in the state of Alabama when it comes to labor. And this isn't doing anybody any good. It's going to make things cost more. It's going to make it harder to get services at your house or for businesses. It's not good for our economy. I could see it at some point bringing us to a screeching halt because we just don't have the people to do the things that we need done.
Whether you agree with his politics or not, this episode is about listening, learning, and understanding the real people behind the platforms. Let's join this conversation with Alabama Senate candidate Kyle Sweetser.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is Alabama Senate candidate Kyle Sweetser. Kyle, thanks for joining the show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Melvin.
So before we begin, I want to drop 3 pieces of trivia on you. Number 1, as of this month, July 2025, there have been 2,002 people serving as U.S. senators, yet no person has ever been named Kyle in that office. I don't know if you knew that. Number 2,
I did not, but
you could be the first. The only Sweetser who's served in elective office was a Vermont state senator. And then the third one, the average age of current U.S. senators is 64.7 years old. So what I'm saying to you is if you win your Senate race, you're going to be creating history and bucking some trends. So that's what you got to look forward to. The Alabama Democratic primary is in less than a year. As of right now, you have 2, last time I looked, you have 2 Democratic primary opponents. Why did you decide to run for Senate?
really, looking at our state, looking at what has been happening in our country, it's almost like, this MAGA movement is trying to make America Alabama, where we've got this one party rule in our state. It's just like this death grip on power. And as I've gotten older, even prior to this, we had problems, but seeing so many people's kids leave over the years and, leave our state because they feel absolutely helpless. So many things don't make sense. When you look at our economy, you look at our income. We're last in income. We're last in life expectancy. We have some of the highest infant mortality rates in the nation. Those are some reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this for the fact that this MAGA movement is degrading the fabric of our society, what holds us together, and they're creating division. And it needs to be stopped. Somebody needs to do something. And in the state of Alabama, in most places, you have 2 choices. You have Republicans, you have the Republican choice, and you have the Democrat choice. That's the reality. In the state of Alabama, though, the Democratic Party over the years has gotten to the point where they're losing by 20 to 30 points on statewide elections. And there has to be a change. There has to be, this move to try to bring people into the Democratic Party. And I feel like I'm uniquely equipped to do that as someone that is a former Republican, a former rational Republican, I would say. And there's plenty of folks like that. And that the Democratic Party can win over, if the Democratic Party, if we move in in a way that embraces others instead of pushing people away. We reach across the aisle and invite folks over that have these concerns. But, you look at just on the environmental end too, and this is something that many Republican voting folks, especially in South Alabama, are big on the environment. They might not like the term climate change, but when it comes to water, when it comes to access to fishing and hunting, it's huge with the Republican Party. It's huge with folks that vote Republican down here. And we have dozens of rivers in the state of Alabama where you can't eat the fish, because we have pollution. You have failing infrastructure like septic sewer wastewater systems that are overflowing into our waterways and causing dangerous bacteria levels. So, our kids can't swim. So I want to focus on representing Alabama and Alabamians. I want to focus on, the flaws that I see in Alabama because I know they exist in other places in the United States and other red states. I think that we have a unique opportunity here in this chaos that the MAGA movement has caused this economic turmoil, where they're going to be hurting people. They're going to be hurting people's pocketbooks. This is an opportunity for the Democratic Party to earn the trust back of folks. In Alabama, a lot of folks lost the trust in the Democratic Party, and I want to help show the folks on the other side and the people in the middle that hey, we can have a functioning two-party system again. And look, the Democratic Party, they took me in and they'll take you in too. And they're the Big Ten party now. They're the welcoming party.
So you come from a very traditional background. You work on a farm with your parents. You're married to your high school sweetheart and you have 2 children. Was this a tough decision for your family, for you to decide to run for an elective office?
No, but just to clarify, I do have a small farm, doesn't produce much of anything, have a couple hundred berry bushes, but I'm a general contractor, so I work in construction. Oh. And, farm and all that other stuff kind of intertwines, goes together. I do a lot of garage doors, roll-up doors, serve the community for years since I was a kid. And my dad got me into that as early as 4 years old. When I was 15, I was sleeping on job sites after hurricanes hit. Hurricane Ivan hit, to secure job sites, pulling off roll-up doors off of fire trucks so the fire trucks could get out and respond to some of these emergencies. But no, it was an easy decision to me. My wife, she's Thai or half Thai, and hearing some of these things that I started hearing on job sites, and in her case too, seeing how the language has changed really against immigrants and anybody that's different, the movement against anyone that's different, it's heartbreaking. And so I have the full support of my family to fight back against this and to hopefully restore human dignity on both sides here, because it really needs to be done. This is a bad direction that our country is going in, where we have dehumanized people to the degree that now I see on news here every day, they post these pictures of, they'll say 15 illegal immigrants arrested, and it's like a trophy picture almost. It's disturbing to me. It's disturbing that we've reached this point to where we've dehumanized people to this degree. And many of these people, these immigrants, they don't have, they're not violent, or they don't have any other, record other than the fact that they're here. They came here to work. They came here to do jobs that other people won't do. And the job sites they're pulling them off of, they're in 100-degree heat. And from someone that works in construction, that works with their hands, when I see a lot of this anti-immigrant talk, I've never seen it come from somebody that I know personally that hustles out there in the heat, that busts their butt. It's always from folks that don't work in 100-degree heat, that think that we can just exist without these folks that are working hard. They deserve, these people that come here and they put everything on the line and they cross a couple thousand miles to get here and they do everything else right. They deserve to be U.S. citizens.
Yeah, I normally try to keep my opinion out of conversations that we have, but one thing I want to say that really bothers me, probably the thing that bothers me the most about this whole thing, other than, well, there are a couple things that bother me a lot. One is people showing up for their scheduled hearings. They're going through the system the way they're supposed to be. They're told, just do things the right way. They're doing things the right way. They've got a scheduled appointment, sometimes their final appointment before they're signed off as citizens, and they're being taken away. That's a problem. That's the problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. When I'm trying to do the right thing, you see that. And like I said, it's just disturbing. But what gets me are the trophy pictures. I mean, that's what it is. It's like, it reminds me of whenever, the hunting season, you see a bunch of people with deer. I mean, it disturbs me. It's the same concept, really. Look at what we did. And as someone that comes from the base of the economy, the base of our country, is construction, is labor, and as those folks that go out there and do all the hard work. We're at this point where we have so many folks that have been led into this delusional belief that we can exist without labor. It's scary because we're, going to see short. We already have, I think in Alabama, you'd have to check me on it. It's either 35 or 42 in that range. Let's say 42 just to be safe. Jobs, people per 100 jobs available. We are in a crisis in the state of Alabama when it comes to labor. And this isn't doing anybody any good. It's going to make things cost more. It's going to make it harder to get services at your house or for businesses. It's not good for our economy. I could see it at some point bringing us to a screeching halt because we just don't have the people to do the things that we need done.
You and I met in real life back in February in Washington, D.C., as we were being evacuated during a bomb threat. I'm sure you remember that. And at that time, we had a conversation, and you mentioned that you were seriously considering running for Senate against incumbent Tommy Tuberville. After you announced your candidacy, Tuberville decided not to seek re-election for Senate and to run for governor instead. Did that sort of feel anticlimactic for you?
No, it's just one fight to the next. And if you look at who's on the Republican end, you've got your typical Alabama Republican establishment running, but then you also have what looks like an extremist in there named Jared Hudson. And you look at, his campaign videos, and it's, I'm here to serve Trump. It's not about serving Alabama for him, or it appears he's just going to ride on that. And, it pans out and it shows the church in his campaign ad, and it says Christ is king or whatever, which that's great if that's your, personal belief. But the United States was founded on a bedrock of the United States, a separation of church and state. And, folks, when you see something like that, when you see someone manipulating people of faith to get into power, it really fires me up to stop them.
So Tuberville is Alabama's most famous Floridian. And speaking of Florida, that now is the location of America's probably first concentration camp, which people have labeled as Alligator Alcatraz. How did we get here as a nation?
It has a lot to do with the rhetoric over the years, starting in 2016 and going down. You look at populism, you look at what happened in Germany in the 1930s, whether, it was an intentional to begin with or not. It's a runaway train where they use fear, lies, and fear and hate and anger to manipulate folks. And what happens is, you have all these things. We'll just mention Epstein files. They used it to get elected. They stirred people up. They said, we're fighting against the deep state, Democrats, whatever. Okay. It made people really, really mad, and now you're to this point where something's got to happen. So what do? They're just going to, as they try to shift blame continuously. And, at some point, if voters don't hold them accountable, if their base doesn't hold them accountable, then it'll keep going in that really wicked direction that Germany went in. And that's actually one of my other big reasons for running, to stop this, to unwind this runaway populism where they're manipulating folks to a degree that we haven't seen or haven't seen in my lifetime. It's very scary that they are manipulating folks like this without any kind of care to what could happen. If they lose control of this essentially this angry mob that they have created.
Well, you're a native of Mobile, Alabama, and you voted for Donald Trump. It's well known. And then during the DNC last time, you spoke in favor of candidate Kamala Harris. Why should Alabama voters of either party trust you?
Well, that's a great question. I'm like most folks in Alabama, and most folks in Alabama, the center or the people that just go out and they work and they put their nose to the grindstone. A lot of folks just feel like, in my case, I felt like the Republican Party at the time, maybe did better for people's pocketbooks, maybe did better for people's families if they're able to afford things. And they ended up not being the case. But yeah, I could have tried to run as a Republican, and I could have went completely far left and tried to appease the furthest of the far left. But I'm not doing that. I'm taking the hard stance. And if you look at last year, what I did with the help of others, I put my face on a billboard all around the Republican National Convention when Trump spoke, my face with my name on it, saying that I was a gun owner, I'd voted for Trump in the past, and I was voting for Harris. I did all this activism. I put a giant target on my back, and nobody paid me to do it. I did it because it was right. It didn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter, especially for Alabama. Left versus right. This is or left or right. This is right versus wrong. This is about putting my country over political party and trying to serve the folks in Mobile, which, by the way, includes the left that haven't been represented. And the left has not been represented almost at all in our state for 15 years. So I feel like I have this. I feel like I have a way to bring in Republicans to keep the middle here, and then also, gain the support of the left, so we can really have some representation that we haven't had. But yeah, to me, this is about my family. This is about my community. This is about my state. Whenever I went around, really post 2018, and you start hearing, people say these extremely xenophobic things, extremely racist things that they weren't saying as much in the past to a complete stranger. To me, this is a fight. It's not only a fight for Mobile, for Alabama, for our country, but it's a fight for my family. And I'm going to do everything that in the future of my children, I'm going to do everything in my power to turn it around in Alabama to where we're not 49th, every metric that matters.
All right. So as you've traveled across the state of Alabama campaigning, what kinds of feedback have you gotten from different constituents, whether they're Black Democrats, white conservatives, but especially unaffiliated conservative voters?
So the middle, perfect. Even many Republicans that have been disenfranchised with the MAGA movement, with the Republican Party, great. I have done pretty well with the Democratic Party. There is, I would say, probably had some feedback, negative feedback from the Palestine activists, and which is kind of adjacent with the Democratic Socialists. So outside of that, the feedback has been phenomenal, very surprising to me. But people are just tired of being beat down in Alabama, and the Democratic Party here realizes that we have to win. And even you look at women's rights, and you look at many of these other issues. Women's rights, for instance, we've moved so far to the right in Alabama. There is no other direction they can go now except for extreme. And one of the things that I point to when I talk about this is the fact that they have pushed last year to basically expand the government's power to where the state to track women across state line and track their periods or women's health using a government database. That's absolutely insane. But that's the direction that we're going in. And so we have to have a way to defeat them using the same strategy, using the same terms. It's not going to work. We have to change the battlefields of each one of these issues, and with women's rights, that's the field that we take them on the state level. Hey, they're trying to track you. They're trying to make a database of you and track you across state lines because they are. And then you look at voting rights. The voting rights, and it goes back to women's issue, to women's rights. And whenever I think in 2022, maybe it made it through the House, they had a bill where something along the lines of you'd have to have a birth certificate right to vote. And what folks don't know, or the majority of Alabamians, the majority of folks in America, is that this would mean that, it would cause problems if a woman was married and changed her last name, having a birth certificate with a different name on it. So we've got to focus on areas that we can win, and we can defeat the Republican Party, this extreme social conservative movement in the state of Alabama that has distracted our population while stripping Alabamians of their rights, and not actually serving the people economically, where we have one of the highest poverty rates in the nation. It's really sad that we haven't been able to break out of this. But I'm running at the top of the ticket to help lead the way on this, to break out of this, to serve every person in Alabama, and the way we can rebuild trust and build the Democratic Party in the state of Alabama. To whenever I go and vote, there's not a bunch of empty slots. I go and vote State House 100, State Senate 34 here where I'm at. Always unopposed Republicans, they win by default. We need to build a Democratic Party in the state of Alabama that is competitive within Alabama, and where we can fill the ballot and inspires people to fill the ballot. So we can have some accountability in our government, and we can take it to these folks and really find ways to serve the people here that haven't been served really since I've been alive by our government.
All right. I want to spend the rest of the time talking about specific policy issues. But before we do that, I sort of have one more lighthearted question to ask you. So you live down in Mobile, which is South Alabama, and Alabama ends at the body of water that has traditionally been called the Gulf of Mexico. What do you call it?
It's always been the Gulf to me. Nobody says anything more than the Gulf. And I've got a huge, man, I used to fish so much. I've been busy, so I sold my boat, but I used to fish all the time. I would work 12 hours a day and have the boat ready and come home and go out in the middle of the night and go out in the Gulf. Never called it, I'm going out. We never say, we're going out to the Gulf of Mexico. We say, hey, I'm going fishing in the Gulf. This is something, that is somebody that lives on the Gulf. It's always been that way.
Yeah, I'm from Southeast Texas, and that's what we called it too. It's just the Gulf.
Right.
So
just another thing to distract people and divide us.
Yeah, anybody who would say the Gulf of America probably doesn't live within 500 miles of the Gulf Coast. All right, so let's get to policy stuff. We've all heard a lot about Trump's one big beautiful bill, but we haven't heard that much about the smaller individual pieces of the bill. So I'm going to give you a list of bullet points from the bill, and I just want you to give your thoughts on each one. So let's start with healthcare access.
All right. Well, healthcare access, that's huge in Alabama, because you look at our rural hospitals leading up to this, 88% of our rural hospitals were operating in the red. I think the numbers, I put it out on X a while back. It was either 18 hospitals are at risk of closing. I mean, literally at any point. When you cut off this access to Medicaid, we're going to have major issues. And it's not just people say, oh, well, the jobs that are associated with the healthcare industry, that's going to be a domino effect that anchors many of these communities. But if you think about it, especially when you live in a rural area, you have to know how long it takes to get to the hospital. You have to know how long it takes. And these are things that normal people don't think about. But it's what folks in these rural areas have to think about. So they're going to be looking at it, and they might go from 30, 45 minutes to get to the hospital to 2 hours. That's the difference between life and death. Really, really scary, but we can work. That's why we need to have people in there in 2026 that we can unwind that part of this bill. If we're able to take control of the Senate, take control of the House, and really rectify this problem that's going to harm so many folks, especially in Alabama and our rural communities.
Okay. The next point is education and school funding.
So, I watched NBC 15 down here in Mobile this morning, and they estimate that with these cuts that we're going to probably lose about 200 jobs eventually. Won't be in the fall here, but later on. And it's gonna hurt our students. It's gonna hurt so many folks here. It's just tough. The education thing is tough. Alabama's had a hard time as it is. When you look at our ranking, we've got to do better for folks. We got to find a way to get the teachers what they need. They're already buying the supplies on their own. So I just don't understand why anybody would do this to our state, and why the folks in our state that are in office, whether they're Republican or Democrat, wouldn't be louder about this.
Okay. Infrastructure and broadband.
This is a great one. So I live in the middle of the woods, and I can't see a house from my house. We actually have a co-op, thankfully, that got us broadband through some kind of program way out in the woods, while the rest of Alabama, I'm not sure if they were able to access this broadband or not. But down the road where my parents live, which down the road here might mean 45 minutes. But anyways, yeah, so they live about 20 minutes away. Cable internet hasn't moved for about 20 years past the line of their road. It has been horrible in the state of Alabama getting access to fast internet, to internet that works properly. We're very lucky. We're very fortunate that we were in a rural area such that we got access to, fiber optic out here. Because prior to that, this is another thing. A lot of folks don't understand what people in rural areas with limited infrastructure have to go through. We were having to use Starlink. Our kids are homeschooled, and so we were using Starlink. And at the time, it was double or triple the price, and not quite worked well, but not quite the same as fiber optic. So we need to really, really make sure that we expand broadband in our state, even if it ends up being Starlink. I know people don't like Elon Musk, but if there's a way the government could help at least purchase that, or actually run fiber optic or broadband lines to people's houses, we need to get it done. Because in Alabama, we just look at it, and like I said, for 20 years, we see all this money get allocated, and it never ends up making it to people. It never ends up impacting people here. So we need to make sure that we get money for that. We need to make sure that we are monitoring and really after the folks that dish this out, and to make sure that it's reaching people.
All right, next topic, immigration and ICE.
Well, I spoke a little bit about immigration, and I'm passionate about that because I have been around adjacent to a lot of these different fields. I primarily do a lot of garage door work, metal building framing, et cetera. And what I do requires a lot of communication. So I can't really do it without, speaking really, really good English down here in the South. That's just the way that it is. However, I am around, a lot of the folks that I see, they're pouring concrete, or they're brick masons, or you see people, on job sites doing roofs. And as I said before, that work is so hard. It's hard. It's hard on your body. A lot of those folks that frame houses too, they understand physics better on a practical level than most people with a college degree. And it's hard at the same time. It's physically demanding. We need to make sure that the folks that are coming here to work, that are coming here and doing the right thing once they get here, we need to make sure that there's a path for citizenship for these folks. We also do need to make sure that our border is secure. That's a big thing. But we have to make it easier for some of these folks here that are working hard, that are committed to our economy, that are committed to our community, that they have a way to become U.S. citizens. Yeah, what they're doing, covering their faces, ICE covering their faces and going after people, that's completely un-American, without due process too. You would never expect any sort of conservative, to a real conservative, to support the government arresting people without due process.
Wow. All right. Next topic, economic development and job opportunities.
Great. So that kind of goes back into infrastructure for me and the other parts. I'm glad I didn't talk about it. But we've got underserved minority communities here that haven't had their infrastructure problems taken care of for years and years and years. And a lot of it has to do with messaging. I'll give you Mobile County. perfect example in how this ties to everybody. We have Pritchard, Alabama, which is a minority community. They only have 10,000 people. Very old wastewater infrastructure. And every time we get a rain, all of that septic sewage bubbles up into people's yards. So it affects that community. But they need $100 to $600 million to take care of that. And part of it is on the state and local level. We kind of got to get people to be able to meet these grant criteria. But folks like Katie Britt, Tommy Tuberville have done zero to use their political capital on a stage to talk about this, to really put the pressure on to make sure we get everything together so we can get this grant money going in. But what's important about these issues, specifically this issue in this underserved community, is that no one has made this. It's about that community, but no one has has went out of their way to show Alabama why it's also important to the rest of Alabama. If you look at this sewage that bubbles out in people's yards, it goes into waterways. It ends up in Mobile Bay. It affects our seafood industry. It affects Baldwin County, Alabama's tourism industry, potentially, which does, last I checked, maybe $3 billion worth of tourism a year. It affects our recreational fishermen. It affects Mobile and Baldwin County. Just this one community of 10,000 people affects well over 500,000 people. And no one has shown or tried to make this issue about everyone. On the surface is 100% about that community, and that is who we really need to focus on. But to sell it to the rest of the folks here, hey, this also affects you. This is why it's important for us to help build infrastructure in these communities. So that'll bring in 400, 600 million. We'll bring in jobs that'll improve public health and public safety, and it'll improve our economy in our workforce. So focusing on things like that, focusing on getting projects finished that we've had issues with here in the state of Alabama, like the I-10 bridge. Tommy Tuberville voted against the funding for the bridge here, and then later took credit for it. And folks still think that he voted for this funding. No, he voted to kill Mobile's economy. That's the way I look at it. You look at right now, you go through this winding tunnel that goes underneath Mobile. It goes underneath downtown Mobile, goes underneath the river, and it causes so much traffic. And people like me, if I have multiple jobs set up, I'm going across the bay, or if you got a business and you're paying 2 or 3 people, they're driving back and forth, they might get stuck in traffic for 3 hours because of the setup that we have. And so things like this, not being able to access the money that is there for our state, is downright frustrating, and it's hurting us. We need to put politics aside. I think they were mad that Biden got this $500 million brought down to Mobile, so they didn't want to build it then.
Wow. All right, next topic, voting rights and access.
So yeah, voting rights, the biggest thing that I have really been paying attention to is that birth certificate issue. And that's just too much. For one, not just the women's rights issue, but it's everyone. Who keeps their birth. There's many people that don't even have their birth certificate. I have mine, but I've spoken with a few people that are like, I don't even know where my birth certificate's at. They should be able to vote. It just seems like another way to rig the game for somebody that's in power by not ensuring voting access to all Alabamians.
All right, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So what a lot of people don't understand about DEI, and I'm glad that you spelled it out because it really does need to be spelled out so people can think about it, is it doesn't just affect minorities. It affects folks with disabilities. And so just like with the underserved community thing that I was talking about, folks need to see that just because they think that something's being taken from them, I guess you could say, and given to someone else, they need to see how this enriches our community. They need to see, or be told it's not just what you think it is. These programs are really, really, really important. They've been important in the past and they're important now that, we really understand that there are many people in America, there are many people in Alabama that start out behind. And it's not their fault. It's the system that we had and the system that we've had for years and years, and especially in Alabama. But there was a case that I'd like to point to. I don't quite remember, but it was someone that had a child. It was a Trump supporter. It had a child with a disability, and this was cutting into that program. And I think they came up to the Capitol in Alabama, in Montgomery, to talk about it. But folks need to understand that we're all human, and we really need to look out for our neighbors. We need to look out for each other, and we need to understand that our world, America, hasn't always been fair, and it's still in many ways not fair. We always need to focus on improving our country, and really enforcing human dignity in our society.
All right, next topic, criminal justice reform.
So with criminal justice reform, you look at Alabama, and we had a story I had looked at a few months ago. There was a guy he's in prison for life for growing pot in his backyard. And he's exceeded the 50-year-old age limit here, which means that his cost to the taxpayer, I think, is almost doubled versus a regular inmate. So we need to look at folks like this and how they're costing the American taxpayer, and how it's inhumane to be keeping someone like that there for life, really to, I guess, give somebody money. I just don't understand why he would be there. But there's a lot of folks they're in there for charges that are like that shouldn't be there. But I will say this. In Mobile, they're more likely to put somebody in jail for that and keep them there than someone that murdered somebody. They there was a guy here, he lured somebody to his house and murdered him with a shovel. And they let him out. He was running around for 6 months. I think, if you hadn't heard the horrific story of Anaya, her dad was, which actually her mother reached out to me, but her dad was a UFC fighter. I think he's out of Birmingham, and their daughter was murdered by someone that I believe shouldn't have even been out of jail. So we have to there's a lot that we can work on. I think that there's many people that are in jail that shouldn't be in jail, in prison. And, there's some folks that maybe we need to, look at, especially whenever they're hurting people and murdering people and doing horrific things to folks, infringing on folks. We need to still make sure that we make sure those folks aren't terrorizing our society. But yeah, there are way too many people here. They're incarcerated at this point. It feels like for no reason. So really need to look at that and see where we can be more, treat people with more dignity and respect.
All right. Next topic, environmental and industrial impact.
This is a great one. So I was talking about that infrastructure in Pritchard that overflows into Mobile Bay, and by focusing on getting infrastructure funding to those issues like that. And it's not just down in Mobile and Baldwin County. I think Loudoun County, they did a test or a poll. 1 out of every 3 people had an intestinal hookworm in one area further up north from here. And they had, septic tanks, septic systems, just leaking all out into the water. So that's a huge issue here. Also, through my travels at work and going into so many different places, we are moving in the right direction when it comes to power in the environment. I get that it's slow, but moving forward, as more folks move down to the South, which is anticipated, tons of folks are moved down to the South, we need to make sure that we're incorporating solar and potentially nuclear into our states to really get away from coal in the future. And I'm not saying, stop all coal right now. That's not realistic. What I'm saying is that we need to have a plan in place where we're not building new coal plants. We're building the economy of the future that is environmentally conscious. As I said before, you look at how many rivers. You go to outdooralabama.com and you can see how many no fish, or you got like a no eat order or whatever they call it on the fish, and it's just dozens. It's dozens of rivers. I want to leave our state. I want to leave our country better than what we were born into. I want to leave it better for our children. I think that should be a focus of everyone. I think when we talk about climate change, or when folks talk about climate change, it's been politicized so much that it's hard to break through to folks that aren't already on your side. So I think, really in Alabama, the air is important, but we really need to focus on the water. Everyone can see the water. Everyone here has a connection to the water, whether you're an outdoorsman or not. I mean, we can show pollution in the water. You can, those no fish orders, those are, no eat for fish. Those are huge. Those are absolutely huge. And that's a way that we can really start to break through to folks that aren't environmentally conscious. Like, hey, we can't eat our own fish in our rivers. We need to do something better for the environment. We need to be better. And I think going the route of solar in the future, where we can use it, going the route of nuclear, where we can use it, and making it a little easier instead of trying to make it harder to bring those that new energy boom into the South. I think we really need to focus on that. That'll help clean up our environment. It'll make life better for everybody.
All right. I just have a couple of topics left. The next one is agriculture and land use.
Yeah. So Alabama has really rich, fertile soil. And as far as agriculture and land use goes, man, I hate to say it, but just there's not enough money in farming, I don't think, And so we talk about agricultural use. What I see here in Mobile, I see a lot of farmland being turned into neighborhoods. As far as it goes, I mean, the industry, as far as what's profitable, one of the things that Alabama could really focus on are catfish farms. You look at how many people they need to operate those farms and the amount of overhead and how much they bring in. You look at catfish farms and access to markets. I've been going down that list. I have a huge list and how much money really they bring in and how much employees they have. But if we really want to move to the future, I think this is kind of weird, because most people think of land. I think that Alabama needs to invest, obviously, to focus in on our peanut industry is huge here. Some other things are really huge here. But moving forward, I think we need to look at aquaculture and, expanding catfish farms, access to those markets, and also down here on the Gulf Coast, oyster farms, producing those in a manner that's sustainable, because going out there and just scooping everything off the bottom, that's not sustainable. We have an overfit. We've always had an overfishing issue. They try to tie it to everything else, but there's only so much that's in the water, and then it's gone. So I think moving forward, we need to make sure that we support our industries that are here. But I think we have a huge opportunity to move into aquaculture or in Alabama to where we're able to farm fish in a sustainable way that doesn't harm species or the environment.
Okay, last topic, not associated with the big Omni bill that just passed, but a big hot topic, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. I want to go into some more details. The Epstein files. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a big one. You could say that Trump won for many, many reasons. That was one of the reasons that he won. He won because the influencers, the podcasters, and everyone in his orbit, in his media orbit, really funneled voters to him under the impression that he was going to release these files, that he was going to fight, the DC swamp, the corruption. And it turns out he might very well be the swampiest of them all. This is huge. This is something that's emotional for a lot of folks down in Alabama, a lot of folks that probably won't ever identify as a political party, but that voted for Trump overwhelmingly in that election. So to see how they handle this is going to be interesting. But right now, this is something that has been so ingrained in the MAGA base that I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it's going to stick with them, and I think it's going to be a part of the MAGA movement's demise, whether it's in 2 years or in 8 years. You're going to see people just, lose their trust, no more trust for this for the MAGA establishment, I guess you could say. They ran on distrust of the government, and now they're not doing these major promises. They're not executing on these major promises, and they're lying in circles. You look at what Pam Bondi said out the gate, that the files are on my desk, and never came out with the files. Now they supposedly, the Department of Justice says they don't exist, right? Or something along those lines. I mean, they just can't get their story straight. So anyone that's paying attention to this, and there are a lot of folks that pay attention to this on the MAGA side, they're going to have a really hard time supporting this movement moving forward.
You could add one thing to what Bondi and Bongino and Kash Patel and even Trump are saying that would make this actually make sense. You add the word anymore. Like, those files don't exist anymore. That would make it all.
You're right about that.
All right, so those are the questions I've got for you today. Our guest today has been Alabama senatorial candidate Kyle Sweetser. Kyle, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So if you win the primary, you're invited to come back and discuss the general election with me.
Absolutely. Oh, and check out my website at KyleForAlabama.com. It's 4 is spelled FOR. Thank y'all.
All right. Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about Kyle, including a link to his website and some of the things that we discussed today. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.